Call the police. That woman is destroying our property values. That's what HOA President Brenda Thornfield shrieked before dialing 911 on my wife for the crime of planting wildflowers in her own front yard. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. The Colorado air smelled like morning rain and possibility. My wife, Patricia, knelt in the dirt, elbows muddy, hair escaping a messy ponytail, humming while she tucked a new columbine into the soil. Across the street, Brenda stood on her chemically. Perfect lawn, full makeup, pressed khakis, perfume so strong it felt weaponized, jabbing her manicured finger like she was conducting an orchestra of outrage. The squad car rolled up. The officer stepped out, took 3 steps toward the dangerous criminal tending her flowers, and stopped cold. His jaw actually dropped. "Your Honor, Judge Blackwood." Brenda's clipboard hit the sidewalk with a plastic clatter. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, stealing oxygen from a scene she no longer controlled. "Oh, did I forget to mention? My wife sentences criminals for a living. What would you do if your HOA Karen called the cops on you for gardening? Drop your HOA nightmare in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. And yeah, tell me if your neighborhood has one of these people." Let me back up. I'm Marcus Blackwood, 58, retired after 32 years with the Colorado Springs Fire Department, the guy who ran into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. My wife, Judge Patricia Blackwood, has spent 15 years calmly sentencing drunk drivers and settling small squabbles with a saint's patience and a steel beam's backbone. We moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 years ago, chasing the retirement. Postcard. Curved streets named after trees that got cut down to build the place, houses that all look beige in 100 different ways, kids leaving chalk art on sidewalks that somehow offends certain people. Our house? Modest ranch. Nothing fancy, but the front yard, Patricia's dream. After years of court calendars that left no time for more than balcony pots, she finally wanted a real garden. Enter Brenda Thornfield, 62, Queen of Maple Ridge Drive. The house with columns that announce importance more than they support anything. Former real estate agent, current HOA president, treats bylaws like scripture and wields a clipboard like a scepter. For 2 years we played ball, dues paid, grass at regulation height, no RVs in driveways. Patricia waved at neighbors. On her jog, I jump-started batteries in winter. Then spring arrived, and Patricia replaced our wheezing Kentucky bluegrass with native Colorado wildflowers, columbine, Indian paintbrush, blanket flower, plants that belong here instead of thirsty grass pretending this is Florida. One morning, I was savoring that bitter first sip of coffee, watching Patricia deadhead spent blooms, when I heard it. Click, click, click. High heels on concrete at 7:30 a.m., Brenda marched up like she had a warrant. "This landscaping violates our community standards," she announced, waving a paper that looked like it survived a dot matrix. Printer. "I'm issuing a $200 fine for non-conforming vegetation." Patricia stood slowly, brushed soil from her knees, and used her calm court voice. "Which specific covenant does this violate?" Brenda's nostrils flared. Section 1244 clearly states all landscaping must maintain community aesthetic standards. "Actually," Patricia said, as patient as sunshine, Section 12.4 limits dead or dying vegetation. These are healthy native plants. I know what I meant when we wrote these rules. And that's when we realized this wasn't a mistake. This was a pattern. Patricia spent 3 evenings reading every HOA page like a legal brief. The covenants covered dead plants, grass height, debris, and eyesores. Nothing about plant types. No aesthetic standards to outlaw a wildflower garden. Then the stories started surfacing. Frank, 74, Vietnam vet, got fined $150 for growing tomatoes where his late wife once grew roses. Vegetables are inappropriate for front yards. Sarah, Single mom, 2 jobs, paid $300 to make chalk art disappear from her own driveway. Unsightly temporary markings. Every target had something in common. Elderly, struggling, or simply not fitting Brenda's beige vision of perfection. "We're not paying," Patricia said, setting down her mug with the kind of quiet certainty that makes defense attorneys sit straighter. 2 days later, a certified letter with embossed return address, of course, magically doubling the fine to $400. Emergency board meeting, Brenda's typed minutes claimed. Enhanced. Penalties. 10 days to pay or face a lien. One problem, Patricia called the board. Emergency meeting, Frank rasped over speakerphone. I've been in Denver with my grandson all week. 2 other board members repeated the same. No notice, no vote, never saw those minutes. Brenda's unanimous vote was exactly 3 people, herself, her neighbor Dorothy, and Dorothy's husband Carl, who treats HOA meetings like naps. Colorado law requires 14 days written notice before. Fines, plus a hearing to defend yourself. Brenda did none of that. Legally, her fine was worth less than a grocery list. Patricia filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Division. Every T crossed, every form perfect. And that's when Brenda began surveillance. At 6 a.m. sharp, her white Lexus prowled the street like a shark. Click, a brown blade of grass. Click, a hose coiled, not hung. Click, click, click. Yesterday's paper at 6:15 a.m. Frank started timing his walks just to wave and watch her scramble. While Brenda built a photo scrapbook of nothing, Patricia built something far more dangerous, a case. She knocked on doors. During evening jogs, listened in grocery lines, logged every story and date. Then she cross-referenced violation dates with board minutes from 2 years. The result? A map of calculated harassment. Fines dropped when multiple board members were out of town. Emergency meetings, timed for maximum rubber stamping, vulnerable targets, discriminatory patterns. This isn't control, Patricia murmured. It's intimidation. Brenda escalated. Architectural review. A thick letter demanded our wildflowers undergo committee approval. 48 hours notice. Basement hearing. Expert witness. Patricia hung up and smiled her courtroom smile, the one that says I brought receipts. Thursday, 6:30 p.m., Community Center basement. 50 years of potlucks baked into the carpet. Fluorescents buzzed like dying insects. Brenda sat behind a folding table with Dorothy and semi-conscious Carl, a briefcase for a garden hearing like this was the Supreme Court. Patricia walked in wearing her judicial robes. Nameplate, the Honorable Patricia Blackwood, Municipal Court Judge. The oxygen left Brenda's. Posture. Dorothy fumbled her glasses. Carl woke up. Is she arresting somebody? Good evening, Patricia said in her court voice. We're here to discuss Colorado statutes regarding HOA authority over indigenous plant cultivation. She opened her leather briefcase and laid out a full legal brief. Case citations, precedent, photos of each plant with Latin names and ecological impact studies. Brenda's expert was her business partner, Roger Pembroke, a man who couldn't tell a dandelion from a daisy if the daisy confessed. Mr. Pembroke, Patricia asked, can you identify the difference between Aquilegia caerulea and Aquilegia chrysantha? The what now? State flower versus its yellow cousin, both. Native, which violates your community standards? It's not really about specific plants. Then what exactly are we reviewing? And then Patricia pulled the pin. Photos of Brenda's backyard. Ornamental fence exceeding 6 feet by 8 inches, a decorative pond with 0 approvals, a hot tub violating the 15-foot setback by 4 feet. Each contradiction documented. Each excuse scribbled down with the same pen that writes sentences. Frank, Sarah, and other neighbors sat like a jury, watching a small empire crumble. This hearing is concluded, Brenda snapped when Patricia asked for the exact covenant requiring reviews for native flora. Not quite, Patricia said. When did this committee receive legal authority to regulate indigenous vegetation? Silence so heavy even the buzzing lights sounded guilty. A week later, Brenda went for the nuclear wallet strike, an emergency special assessment, $5,000 from each household, due in 30 days. Legal defense against frivolous complaints, she said. Translation: pay for my mess. She called a mandatory meeting in the same basement she'd lost. It was packed, retirees clutching letters like evidence, toddlers twisting in laps, the air thick with fried chicken ghosts and green bean casserole. Friends. And neighbors, Brenda began in her realtor sincerity. One selfish household. Excuse me, Patricia stood. Jeans, sweater, legal pad, gravity. Which legal expenses are we paying? Which attorney represents the HOA? Morrison Burke and Associates, Brenda said too quickly. Interesting, Patricia replied. Because according to the Colorado Open Records request I filed last Tuesday, the HOA paid $47,000 to Thornfield Property Solutions over the last 2 years. A murmur rippled the room. Your company, Mrs. Thornfield. Invoices show $8,000 in landscape consulting during months when no landscaping was approved or completed. Frank stood. She charged me $50 to remove invasive weeds from my memorial rose garden. Guess where the invoice went? Sarah raised a hand. My vegetable violation. She said the fine went to community beautification. The check was made out to Thornfield Property Solutions. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. And one more thing, Patricia said. The HOA's corporate status was dissolved 18 months ago for failure to file state paperwork, which means every fine, every fee, every assessment collected since then was paid to an organization that legally didn't exist. Silence. Then Mrs. Peterson from Pine Street. What does that mean? It means, Patricia answered gently, those funds went into accounts controlled by Mrs. Thornfield, without valid corporate authority. Brenda grabbed her briefcase, knocked over a chair, and stormed out. The door slam echoed like a gavel. Patricia wasn't guessing. She'd teamed with her paralegal friend Jennifer to trace records, dissolved status, missing filings, personal deposits. Classic small-time embezzlement. $23,000 unaccounted for. Patterns that looked suspiciously like discriminatory enforcement. Elderly, single parents, families who didn't fit Brenda's beige order. We had enough to go straight to the DA. We could, Patricia said, sipping tea over a table now buried in documents. But that won't fix Frank's memorial garden. It won't give Sarah back the months she spent afraid to let her kids draw with chalk. What do you want to do? She smiled. Give Brenda what she's been demanding all along, a community that follows the rules, all of them. Operation Wildflower Justice launched at 8 a.m. the next morning. Our breakfast table became mission control. Patricia with 3 legal pads and a laptop. Frank with a manila folder thick as a phone book. Sarah with a smartphone, a portable printer, and social media skill that would make a campaign manager blush. The kitchen smelled like coffee cake, paper, and righteous momentum. Plan, 3 prongs. 1. Restore the HOA legally. File articles with the Secretary of State, pay back fees, hold proper elections. Under CRS 38-33.3-317, covenants needing a corporation are temporarily unenforceable when that corporation dissolves. Brenda had been enforcing rules with no authority. Frank, Patricia said, you're interim president. I just want to grow tomatoes, he muttered, and accepted. 2. Freeze accounts and recover money. Sarah's database cross-referenced violations with bank deposits, doorbell footage, next-door posts, timestamps, screenshots, the kind of meticulous log that makes civil attorneys salivate. Illegally assessed homeowners can often claim triple damages under Colorado consumer protection laws. 3. Make sure it never happens again. Turns out Thornfield Property Solutions had consulting contracts with 4 other HOAs. This wasn't isolated. It was a business model. We built privately, documented meticulously, and, per Patricia's strategy, let Brenda keep digging her own grave. Brenda responded like a cornered animal. She filed a complaint with the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline, accusing Patricia of weaponizing the legal system. Patricia filed it in what she calls the People Who Don't Understand Courts folder. A bottom-tier PI started taking not-subtle photos from a car. Flyers popped up on windshields. Corrupt judge living among us. Saturday at the Garden Center, Brenda held court in the checkout line, telling strangers we thought we were above the law. It was performance art for the profoundly unserious. Then, she went after Patricia's mother, 78 years old, watering our wildflowers, demanding she control her daughter. Frank witnessed the whole thing. That night, the house smelled like stress-baked chocolate chip cookies and quiet fury. Monday, a federal lawsuit, Thornfield versus Blackwood, claiming civil rights violations under color of law. It was legal nonsense in formal clothing, but nonsense still demands a response. Tuesday, Brenda staged a solo protest in the courthouse lobby with a homemade sign, "Corrupt Judge Blackwood, where is justice?" Security couldn't remove her. The lobby acoustics carried every grievance like a soap opera on a sound system. Detective Ray Kowalski walked in for unrelated testimony, sized up the scene, and asked for specifics. "What cases has Judge Blackwood heard involving you?" he asked. "Well, not any yet," Brenda said. "But she could. So you're protesting the potential for bias in cases that don't exist." Then Ray ran her name. Routine. And found 3 unpaid parking tickets and a bench warrant for failure to appear on a speeding violation from the same municipal system she was protesting. "Ma'am," Ray said, formal now, "I need you to come with me." Her sign hit the floor with a cardboard sigh. The hallway air tasted like irony and disinfectant. 3 days later, Brenda made the call that ended her reign. I was pressure washing the driveway. Inside, Patricia's voice shifted from casual to courtroom in 3 seconds. "Yes, this is Judge Blackwood. What, are you certain? I'll be right there." Brenda called 911. Patricia told me at the door, keys in hand, a smile she couldn't hide. "She's reporting me for destroying community property, the wildflower garden." In Brenda's mind, because the HOA governed community standards and the garden violated her standards, the garden was community property, and Patricia was vandalizing it. I called Frank. "Bring everyone." By the time the cruiser rolled up, half the neighborhood lined the sidewalks. Sarah had her phone lifted calmly, already in record mode. Mrs. Peterson shuffled over with her walker, refusing to miss the show. Ray stepped out, scanning the faces, the flowers, the moment. "There she is," Brenda declared, pointing at a woman kneeling peacefully by Columbine, jeans dusty, hands in the soil, the way hands belong in the soil. "This woman is destroying community property." Ray looked at Patricia, then at Brenda, then at the crowd. "Ma'am," he said, all professionalism, "what crime is being committed here?" "Destruction of community property, violation of covenants, defiance of lawful authority." Brenda waved a folder like it contained the Constitution and a miracle. Ray walked to Patricia. She stood, brushed dirt from her knees with the dignity of someone who trusts sunlight more than theatrics. "Your Honor," he said. The 2 words rang out like a gavel. A visible shiver went through the crowd. Mrs. Peterson's mouth fell open. Sarah's camera never wavered, but her eyes widened. Even Frank, who knew, straightened. Brenda's finger froze mid-air. Her folder slipped. Papers fluttered like white flags onto her perfect lawn. "Your Honor," she squeaked. "Judge. Patricia Blackwood, Municipal Court," Patricia said, offering Ray a dirt-dusted hand, which he shook with the familiarity of 3 years of fair hearings. "Ma'am," Ray turned back to Brenda, voice calibrated to gentle reality checks. Are you filing a complaint that a municipal judge is gardening in her own yard? The HOA, my authority. Brenda's words tumbled and tripped. Frank stepped forward, voice like a command post. Officer, this woman's been stealing from our neighborhood for 2 years. The dominoes fell. Within 48 hours, Brenda resigned from every HOA role across all 4 communities connected to Thornfield Property Solutions. Her federal lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, legal for "Don't bring this circus back." The Colorado Attorney General moved fast once media touched the story. Nobody likes headlines about embezzling HOA presidents targeting veterans and single parents in an election year. Brenda pled guilty to theft, fraud, and filing false police reports. 3 years probation, full restitution, permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The restitution checks hit like cool water after a long fire. But Frank said the real victory was simpler. His tomatoes won first prize at the County Fair. We held our first legitimate HOA election that October. Proper notice, real ballots, 0 all in favor while I'm not looking. Frank became president unanimously. He spent his acceptance speech insisting he never wanted the job. Sarah took treasurer because she's under 60 and actually likes spreadsheets. We recovered almost $34,000 with interest and penalties. That money built a community garden where Brenda's consulting fees turned into basil, tomatoes, herbs, and the kind of flowers that belong in Colorado soil. The air smells like fresh leaves and neighborly laughter again. Frank donated part of his pension to launch the Willowbrook Educational Scholarship, helping local kids study law, public service, and agricultural sciences. 3 recipients already. Sarah's daughter plans to be a civil rights attorney. Exactly 1 year after Brenda's arrest, we hosted the first Wildflower Festival. Bluegrass on the breeze, kids chasing bubbles, booths from native plant societies, Frank's military-grade barbecue perfuming the block. Patricia's garden was the centerpiece, later featured in Colorado Gardening Magazine, then in a university. Study on native plant restoration. The property values? Up 15%. Turns out real community is more valuable than fake aesthetic standards. The ripples spread statewide. The legislature passed the Thornfield Accountability Act. Stronger HOA, oversight, clearer homeowner rights. Patricia speaks at judicial conferences now, reminding rooms full of lawyers that justice works best when it's fair and local. And Brenda, Arizona, cited for pool violations, arguing with maintenance staff. Some people never meet a lesson they can't ignore. Here's your takeaway. Practical, simple, powerful. Always ask for proof your HOA is properly filed with the state before paying disputed fines. Document everything. Photos, dates, comments. Discriminatory enforcement patterns can trigger state and federal consequences. And find your Frank, the neighbor who stands up when bullies think clipboards make them kings. Your stories save other people time, money, and peace. Drop your worst HOA saga in the comments. We read every single one and feature the wildest in future episodes. If this gave you secondhand rage or first-class satisfaction, tap like, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe. You've been watching HOA Stories, where petty tyrants get reality checked and good neighbors win. Next week, the parking enforcer who tried to ticket the new transportation director's car while she was standing there watching. Community justice is sweeter than Patricia's wildflower honey, and that's saying something. Section 2. Patricia's wildflower honey still sat in a row of mason jars on our kitchen counter, golden sunlight trapped inside glass. Every morning, when I stirred a spoonful into my coffee, it reminded me that some victories taste simple, sweet, unpretentious, earned. The garden outside glowed with colors most neighborhoods only saw in seed catalogs. Kids biked past, waving at Patricia like she was some kind of neighborhood legend, which, in truth, she had become. But justice has a way of echoing long after the gavel falls. Brenda Thornfield's downfall wasn't just a story for Willowbrook Estates. It was a stone thrown into a pond, and the ripples reached farther than we ever expected. A week after Brenda packed up her Lexus and fled to Arizona, an email landed in Patricia's inbox. Subject line, "Need guidance, HOA nightmare in Boulder County." Attached were PDFs of violation notices that looked eerily familiar. $500 fines for non-standard fencing, $250 for seasonal clutter, because a family left a pumpkin on their porch past Thanksgiving. Patricia scrolled through them slowly, eyes narrowing. The formatting, the wording, the ridiculous reach. It was almost as if Brenda had left behind a playbook and someone else had picked it up. That evening, while Patricia read case law under the soft light of our living room lamp, I leaned against the doorway. "It's not just here, is it?" She closed the folder and sighed. "Marcus, it's never just one." Brenda was sloppy. Others are smarter. The Boulder family's HOA president had a background in property management consulting. Sound familiar? He'd hired an advisor 3 years ago. When Patricia pulled the business filings, the name jumped out like a ghost refusing to stay buried. Thornfield Property Solutions, Consulting Division. Brenda may have been banned in Colorado, but her company's fingerprints were still smudged across other neighborhoods. The next HOA meeting we hosted wasn't just about Willowbrook anymore. Frank spread a county map across our dining room table, red X's marking communities that had sent emails after our story hit the local news. Sarah had set up an anonymous tip line through the resource website she built, and messages were pouring in faster than we could read them. Elderly couples confused about mystery compliance fees. Military families fined for garden flags. Single parents harassed for excessive outdoor toys. Each story a thread, and together they wove a tapestry of abuse. Patricia tapped the map with her pen. "This is bigger than Brenda. This is a system of copycats, and they're counting on people being too tired or too scared to fight." Frank grunted, arms crossed. "Then we fight for them." That became our mission whether we wanted it or not. Willowbrook Estates had become ground zero for what neighbors started calling the Wildflower Rebellion. Word spread online. Local TV ran segments about the judge who took on the HOA tyrant. Reporters showed up outside our fence with microphones, asking Patricia if she planned to run for office. She laughed it off. Her courtroom was enough. Battlefield for one lifetime. But the attention fueled something larger. One Saturday morning, we found ourselves driving to Denver for a town hall on HOA reform. The room was packed wall to wall, retirees, young couples with strollers, veterans in ball caps embroidered with campaign ribbons. On stage, Patricia wasn't just my wife in gardening jeans. She was a speaker, a force. She told the story of Brenda's rise and fall, weaving it with lessons on due process, governance, and the power of communities to demand accountability. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted long enough to make her cheeks flush, but the fight wasn't over. Back in Willowbrook, things felt peaceful, almost suspiciously so. Neighbors planted freely, kids drew chalk murals stretching down half the block, and Frank finally installed that tomato trellis without looking over his shoulder. But Patricia knew better than to assume the storm had passed. One evening, she returned from court with an envelope in hand. No return address. Inside, a grainy photograph of our garden, black and white, printed on cheap paper. Across it, in red ink, the words, "You don't get to decide the rules." It wasn't Brenda's handwriting. This was someone new. I remember the way Patricia held the photo between two fingers, like it smelled of gasoline. She didn't look shaken. Judges learned to face worse, but her eyes told me the war was shifting. Brenda had been the face, but there were others waiting in the wings. That night, while our neighbors watered plants and kids played tag in the street, we sat inside with the curtains drawn. Patricia spread the photo on the table. Sarah opened her laptop and ran metadata checks. Frank polished his reading glasses, muttering about military counterintelligence. And me? I brewed another pot of coffee because I knew where this was headed. This isn't just a fight about flowers anymore, Patricia said, voice low but steady. It's about power, and people who abuse it don't just vanish because one woman fell. Outside, the wildflowers glowed under the streetlight. Inside, Operation Wildflower Justice had evolved into something bigger, something that would drag us deeper than we'd ever planned. And little did we know, the next chapter was about to put Patricia not just against HOA tyrants, but against the very lawmakers who had enabled them all along. The black and white photo sat on our kitchen table like a loaded gun. No return address, no fingerprints we could see, just those 5 words scrawled in red marker. You don't get to decide the rules. Patricia didn't flinch. She'd stared. Down defendants who swore vengeance, lawyers who thought intimidation was strategy, even jurors too afraid to render verdicts. But I knew her well enough to catch the flicker in her eyes, the shift from irritation to calculation. Whoever sent this, she said calmly, isn't warning us. They're daring us. That night, Willowbrook Estates felt different. Porch lights burned a little brighter. Neighbors locked doors they'd once left open. Even Frank walked his dog with a flashlight beam sweeping the hedges. Fear had crept in, but it didn't stay long. Because when you've already survived Brenda Thornfield's reign, one anonymous letter feels less like a threat and more like a challenge. 2 days later, Patricia was invited to testify before the Colorado State Senate's Committee on Housing and Property Law. A local journalist had broken the story of Brenda's dissolved HOA status and the state's lack of oversight. And suddenly, lawmakers wanted to look tough. We drove up to Denver that morning in my old Ford truck, coffee thermoses rattling in the cup holders, Sarah in the back seat, tapping away on her laptop. Your testimony's going viral before you even give it, she said without looking up. Wildflower justice is trending. When we stepped into the marble hallways of the Capitol, Patricia didn't look like a gardener. She looked like what she was, a judge, a woman who had spent 15 years balancing fairness against stubbornness. The committee room buzzed with cameras, reporters, and more lobbyists in tailored suits than I cared to count. The chair banged his gavel. We welcome Judge Patricia Blackwood, she began quietly. Told the story of one woman's wildflower garden, of arbitrary fines and fraudulent meetings, of veterans and single mothers targeted by rules invented on a whim. Her voice grew stronger as she described Brenda's embezzlement, the missing filings, the intimidation. And then she delivered the line that reporters would quote for weeks. An HOA is supposed to protect a neighborhood, but without oversight it becomes a weapon. And in the wrong hands, a clipboard can do more damage than a crowbar. The room erupted, not in applause, but in murmurs, shifting bodies, scribbling pens. Even a couple senators leaned back, eyebrows raised. But not everyone was pleased. As we left the chamber, a man in a navy suit intercepted us. Slick hair, perfect smile, handshake that lasted too long. Judge Blackwood, he said smoothly, I represent the Colorado Association of Community Management Professionals. We'd like to discuss your testimony. Patricia leveled him, with the same look she used on arrogant attorneys. Sir, if you have concerns, put them in writing. His smile faltered for half a beat. Of course. That night, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't anonymous. It bore the letterhead of a powerful law firm downtown. Inside was a polite but pointed letter warning Patricia that her public statements risked defamation against duly elected HOA officials and the property management companies that served them. Translation: they were rattled. Frank slammed. his fist on our table. "That's not a warning. That's the first volley." And he was right. Within a week, smear pieces started circulating online. Anonymous blogs calling Patricia an activist judge abusing her bench. Flyers appeared again on windshields, professionally printed this time, claiming Willowbrook Estates was lawless under her influence. But the smear campaign backfired. Because for every whisper against her, 10 neighbors stepped forward with their own stories. Veterans posted photos of their Purple Heart license plates. Parents uploaded videos of kids drawing chalk art with captions, "Still waiting for my fine, Brenda." Sarah turned it all into a social media campaign so relentless that local news couldn't ignore it. Then came the rally. One crisp Saturday morning, hundreds gathered on the lawn outside the Capitol. Hand-painted signs waved in the autumn air. HOA, Homeowner Oppression Agency, we stand with Judge Blackwood, and my favorite, carried by Frank himself, wildflowers are not a crime. Patricia didn't want to speak. Judges rarely do outside courtrooms, but the crowd begged. So she stepped up, her robe left behind in favor of a simple denim jacket. Her voice carried over the microphones, steady and clear. "This isn't about me. It's about every neighbor who's been told their heritage flag doesn't belong, every veteran fined for a garden, every parent silenced because their child's chalk art offended someone with power. Laws without fairness aren't justice, and communities without trust aren't home." The cheer shook the streets. Cars honked in support. For one breathtaking moment, I thought maybe we'd already won, but victory always tempts enemies out of the shadows. That evening, while the last of the rally signs leaned against our garage, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from the tip line. A single line of text, no signature. Brenda was just the beginning. Look at Ridgeview Heights. Attached was a PDF, 20 pages of violation notices from another HOA. Same language, same inflated fines, and at the bottom of each notice, consulting. Approved by Thornfield Property Solutions. Patricia read it in silence, lips pressed thin. Then she set it down and looked at me. "Marcus, this isn't a neighborhood fight anymore. This is statewide." And in that instant, I knew part 3 of our story wasn't going to end in our garden. It was going to drag us into the very heart of how power works in Colorado and who profits from keeping homeowners afraid. Section 4, the PDF from Ridgeview Heights, HOA spread across our table like a blueprint for corruption. 20 pages of fines, all stamped with the same language Brenda had once used like a cudgel. $500 for a non-standard door color. $750 for seasonal decor extending beyond authorized holiday period. $200 for excessive shrubbery. It was Brenda's ghost haunting a whole new neighborhood. Except this ghost had multiplied. Patricia flipped through the pages with the same expression she wore in court when a defense attorney thought bluffing would work. Same font, same legal phrasing, same consulting firm. Her finger tapped the bottom of the page. Thornfield Property Solutions. "But Brenda's gone," I said. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Or she passed the torch." Sarah dug deeper. "Online." Within an hour, she pulled up corporate records showing that when Brenda fled Colorado, she hadn't dissolved Thornfield Property Solutions. She had sold controlling interest to a property management conglomerate out of Denver, Crestfield Holdings. Crestfield Holdings managed nearly 30 HOAs across the state, and now Brenda's playbook was their business model. Frank leaned forward, his voice gravelly as ever. "So we cut off the head, and 3 more grew back." That week, we drove out to Ridgeview Heights to meet residents. It was a wealthier neighborhood than ours. Stone facades, gated entries, SUVs gleaming in driveways. But behind the manicured hedges, stories poured out like water from a cracked dam. An elderly couple fined $600 because their front porch wind chimes were audibly disruptive. A young Latino family told to remove their Dia de los Muertos decorations because they violated community standards. A veteran forced to tear down a backyard ramp he'd built for his wheelchair-bound wife. Unapproved structure, Patricia. Listened, took notes, asked questions with the precision of a cross-examination. Each answer deepened the pit in my stomach. This wasn't negligence. This was targeted, calculated, discriminatory. That night, back in Willowbrook, Patricia gathered our team again, Frank with his folders, Sarah with her laptop, me with the coffee pot. Crestfield Holdings has weaponized Brenda's system, she said, and they have money, attorneys, lobbyists. Which means, Frank grunted, they're going to come after you. He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, Patricia received an official notice from the Colorado Judicial Review Board. Someone had filed a formal ethics complaint, alleging that she was using her judicial position to advance personal and political agendas against community associations. The complainant? A Denver law firm representing Crestfield Holdings. For the first time, I saw Patricia falter. Just slightly, but enough that I noticed her hands lingered longer on the letter. They're trying to disqualify me, she whispered. If they succeed, I won't just lose this fight. I could lose the bench. That was the betrayal. Not from Crestfield, we expected them to fight. The betrayal came when one of our supposed allies turned out to be feeding them ammunition. We found out during a late-night call from Jennifer, Patricia's paralegal friend. She'd been digging into the judicial review filing. Patricia, she said carefully, the complaint cites internal case schedules. Details that weren't public. Meaning someone inside the courthouse leaked them. The words hit harder than any fine, any smear flyer, any threat. This wasn't just an HOA war anymore. This was political, institutional. Someone with power wanted Patricia silenced. The next day, when Patricia walked into her courtroom, whispers followed. Colleagues avoided eye contact. A couple attorneys who used to greet her warmly now looked away. It was the loneliest I'd ever seen her look. That night, while she worked at the dining table, I asked the question that had been burning my tongue all day. Patty, is it worth it? This fight? If it costs you your bench? She looked up slowly, and I knew my answer before she spoke. Marcus, if I can't use this position to protect people who don't have the power to protect themselves, then what's the point of the bench? Her voice didn't shake. Not once. So we doubled down. Sarah launched a new campaign. Justice for homeowners. Residents from across the state uploaded videos of their stories, holding up their violation letters like evidence in a trial by public opinion. A father in Boulder standing next to his son's dismantled treehouse. A mother in Pueblo crying over a lien placed on her home for leaving a bicycle in the driveway. A Korean War veteran clutching a notice demanding he remove his American flag because it disrupted community uniformity. The stories went viral. Local news turned into national coverage. Patricia was invited onto morning shows, though she declined most. But one night she agreed to a live interview on Channel 9. Judge Blackwood, the anchor asked, critics say you're overstepping by targeting private associations. What do you say to that? Patricia leaned forward, calm and sharp. Private associations have power only because the state gives it to them. And when that power is abused, the state has a duty to correct it. Clips of that answer lit up social media. Even people outside Colorado began paying attention, which is exactly why the threats escalated. The next envelope wasn't a letter. It was a dead wildflower, pressed flat, brittle, its petals falling apart as I opened the flap. No words, just the flower. I stared at it for a long time. Then I burned it over the sink. Patricia didn't even look up from her notes. Every bully escalates before they break, she said. She was right. But none of us knew how far Crestfield and their allies were willing to go. Because within a week, what began as HOA drama in our quiet street was about to spill into a federal courtroom. And this time, it wasn't Brenda on trial. It was us. Section 5. The summons came on a rainy Tuesday. A thick envelope stamped with the seal of the United States District Court for the District of Colorado. Patricia slid it open at the kitchen table, steam rising from her untouched tea. Inside, Crestfield Holdings vs. Blackwood, a federal lawsuit accusing her of defamation, tortious interference, and abuse of judicial office. Damages demanded. $10 million. Sarah read it twice, her hands shaking. Frank muttered a string of words I can't repeat here. I just stared at my wife, this woman who had stared down killers in her courtroom, who had buried friends in uniform, beside me, who had chosen wildflowers over fear, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Not doubt, not fear, but weariness. They're trying to bury us in paper, Patricia whispered, and they almost did. The weeks that followed blurred into depositions, filings, motions. Crestfield's attorneys were everywhere, sharp suits, sharper smiles, voices dripping with practiced confidence. They had resources, connections, an entire machine designed to grind us down. But Patricia had something they didn't. Truth. Our dining room became a war room again. Stacks of files towered like fortifications. Sarah tracked every fraudulent fine Crestfield's HOAs had levied, cross-referencing dates with corporate filings. Frank reached out to veterans groups, bringing in sworn statements from across the state. I handled logistics, coffee runs, late-night printer jams. Patricia built the case like a cathedral, stone by stone, precedent by precedent. The trial began in early spring. The federal courthouse in Denver was a cavern of marble and silence, the kind of place where every footstep echoes like judgment. Crestfield's attorneys arrived in a fleet of black SUVs, briefcases gleaming. Our side? A retired firefighter, a social media whiz, a veteran with folders, and one determined judge who refused to bow. Opening statements painted Patricia as a rogue jurist, a woman weaponizing her robe for personal vendettas. Their lead counsel gestured theatrically toward her, calling her a gardener obsessed with personal glory. Then Patricia rose. She wore no robe, just a navy suit and a small silver pin on her lapel. Her voice was steady, the same voice that had calmed panicked defendants and scolded arrogant lawyers. "I'm here not because I chose this fight," she began, "but because Crestfield Holdings and its partners chose to weaponize homeowners, associations against the very people they were meant to serve, veterans, single parents, elderly widows. Their weapon was fear, their currency was silence, and their profit was our neighbor's pain." The courtroom was silent, save for the scratch of reporters' pens. For 2 weeks, evidence rolled out like a dam breaking. Sarah presented financial charts linking Crestfield to Thornfield Property Solutions, showing money funneled into shell accounts. Frank testified about Brenda's manipulation of veterans, his gravelly voice shaking jurors awake. Neighbors told. Stories of humiliation, of liens on homes, of cultural erasure disguised as standards. Then came the cross-examination that cracked Crestfield wide open. Patricia held up an email, projected on the screen. It was from Crestfield's regional manager, dated 6 months earlier. The subject line, target list. Inside, bullet points. Elderly residents, high compliance probability. Single parents, avoid litigation risk. Immigrant families, enforce uniformity standards aggressively. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Crestfield's attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled. The words were there, black and white, undeniable. And then, like a final twist written for drama, the witness admitted under oath that the target list template had originally been drafted by none other than Brenda Thornfield. It was over. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Their verdict, Crestfield Holdings guilty of fraudulent practices, discriminatory enforcement, and malicious prosecution. Patricia was cleared of all accusations, awarded damages, and vindicated in the eyes of the law. But the real victory came outside the courthouse. When Patricia and I stepped into the sunlight, hundreds of people were waiting. Neighbors from Willowbrook, Ridgeview Heights, and communities we'd never even visited. They carried flowers, wildflowers, bright and defiant, lifted high like banners. The cheer that erupted wasn't just relief. It was rebellion turned triumph. The fallout was swift. Crestfield Holdings collapsed under federal investigation. Executives resigned, assets frozen, contracts terminated. The Colorado legislature fast-tracked reforms Patricia had testified for: mandatory audits, homeowner bill of rights, criminal penalties for fraudulent enforcement. Brenda Thornfield's name resurfaced one last time in the indictments, her playbook, cited as Exhibit A. She'd faded into obscurity in Arizona, but her legacy had ignited the fire that consumed her empire. Months later, our neighborhood looked different. The community garden overflowed with vegetables and laughter. Frank finally retired from his temporary HOA presidency, replaced by a young teacher determined to keep things fair. Sarah's daughter won the scholarship and announced she was heading to law school. And Patricia? She returned to her bench. But something had changed. When she walked into her courtroom, defendants no longer saw just a judge. They saw a woman who had fought an empire and won. Respect followed her like a shadow. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the wildflowers sway in the breeze, Patricia reached for my hand. "Marcus," she said softly, "I never wanted to be a symbol." "You're not," I told her. "You're a reminder. That one person standing firm can make an entire system shake." She smiled then, the rare, unguarded smile that still made me feel like the luckiest man alive. And as the sun dipped behind the Rockies, I realized something. Brenda had tried to kill a garden. Instead, she'd planted a movement. Now, every time I see a patch of wildflowers on a suburban lawn, I know it isn't just decoration. It's defiance. It's hope. It's proof that communities belong to the people who love them, not the tyrants who try to control them. So here's your takeaway. For the last time, fight back. Document everything. Demand accountability. And when someone tells you wildflowers don't belong, plant more. Because sometimes the smallest blooms crack the hardest concrete. And that's how the HOA war ended, not with Brenda's clipboard, not with Crestfield's lawyers, but with a neighborhood that refused to kneel. You've been watching HOA Stories. If this tale lit a fire in you, smash that like, drop your own HOA nightmare in the comments, and subscribe for more battles, more victories, more justice served suburban style. Next week, we're bringing you the story of the HOA parking enforcer who tried to ticket the new state transportation director's car while she was standing there watching. Trust me, you don't want to miss that one.